I showed up at my sister's birthday after 11 years. Nobody recognized me, not even my own mother. Her husband looked me in the eye and asked who I was. I just smiled and said, if you truly knew, you'd see people begging for forgiveness soon enough. Hey Reddit. It's strange how time can morph you into someone so unfamiliar that even the people who once tucked you into bed or called you family now look through you like a ghost. 11 years is a long time to disappear. Long enough for memories to fade, for wounds to scab over, and for lies to take root and grow like weeds in a garden nobody bothered to tend. I never planned on going back. But something deep inside me, a nagging ache, a hunger for closure, or maybe revenge, pulled me toward that familiar house on a day I knew they'd all be there. My sister's birthday. The same sister who once held my hand through thunderstorms but stood silent when I needed her the most. The house hadn't changed much, a fresh coat of paint, some new landscaping, but it still carried that same weight, the same suffocating atmosphere masked by laughter and decorations. I stood outside for a long moment, just observing from the sidewalk. Balloons danced in the breeze, and the sounds of celebration carried into the street. It was almost poetic, how a place that once broke me was now filled with joy, completely oblivious to the ghost about to walk through its doors. I straightened my collar, adjusted the small box tucked under my arm, and stepped through the front gate. People moved around like I was invisible. A few guests smiled politely, assuming I was just another distant relative or friend of the family. My hands trembled slightly as I entered the living room, where my mother stood, laughing softly with a glass of wine in hand. My heart stung at the sight of her, older, wearier, but still so painfully familiar. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, but she looked right past me, gave a nod of acknowledgement, and turned to greet someone else. Not even a flicker of recognition. Not even a hesitation. I was both relieved and furious. Maybe part of me wanted her to fall to her knees and sob when she saw me. Maybe I wanted answers or apologies or just proof that I had mattered at some point in my life. I moved deeper into the house, scanning for my sister. It wasn't long before I saw her, dressed beautifully, glowing in that effortless way she always did. She laughed as her husband wrapped his arms around her waist and whispered something in her ear. They looked happy. They looked like a couple untouched by the ruin they'd helped create. Then he saw me, her husband. He squinted, tilted his head like he was trying to place me, then approached with a polite suspicion of someone trying to figure out if you belong or if you're just some party crasher. He stopped a few feet away and asked casually but cautiously, "Who are you?" I smiled, not because I was happy, but because the moment was finally here, the one I'd imagined so many times. I leaned in slightly and said, "If you truly knew who I was, you'd see people begging for forgiveness very, very soon." His expression shifted immediately. Confusion turned into unease, like some small part of him suddenly understood that I wasn't just another guest. He turned to call my sister, but I walked past him before he could finish the sentence. She turned to face me, her smile faltering as her eyes scanned my face. There was something there, a flicker, a gasp caught in her throat, but nothing came out. Not my name. Not an apology. Just silence. I handed her the small box. No words. Just the box. Her hand shook as she took it. She opened it slowly, cautiously, and the moment her eyes landed on what was inside, the color drained from her face. Inside was a photograph, faded but sharp enough to make the past punch her in the gut. The same photo that had once been torn to shreds and thrown in the trash, a photo she swore she never had, me, her, and our father, before everything fell apart. My mother appeared behind her, looking annoyed, probably ready to scold her for causing a scene. But then she saw me. Her glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. She covered her mouth like she had just seen a ghost, and in a way, she had. The look on her face wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was fear. The room had begun to go quiet. Conversations faded to murmurs, then to silence. Every eye in the room shifted between me, my sister, and my mother. I could feel the pressure building like a dam ready to burst. My mother took one step forward, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "You weren't supposed to come back." Her words struck harder than any slap. There was no warmth in them, no relief, no remorse. Just that raw, bitter edge of a secret unraveling too soon. It wasn't disbelief in her voice. It was fear that the truth she'd buried was about to rise from the grave. And that's when it hit me. They had moved on not because they healed, but because they erased me. I was never missing in their world. I was deleted. My absence had been convenient. They didn't search. They didn't grieve. They buried the truth beneath a mountain of lies and lived like I never existed. I had waited for years hoping they'd call, hoping someone would search, even pray, but nothing came. And now, after all these years, they stood in front of me acting like my presence was an inconvenience, like I was an unwanted interruption in their perfect little story. I turned to walk toward the door, heart racing with the weight of everything unsaid. But just as I reached the threshold, I heard my sister's husband mutter under his breath. "So it's true. He did come back." I stopped in my tracks, the air thick with tension. I didn't even turn fully around. My voice was low, calm, but laced with a fire I had been carrying for over a decade. "There's a lot more that's true. And you're all about to find out." Then I walked out. Not because I was done, but because the real story was only beginning. The night after the party, I sat alone in the dim glow of a dusty motel lamp, listening to the rain tap relentlessly against the window. I hadn't planned what came next. For years, all I thought about was getting to this moment, showing up, revealing the truth, seeing their faces collapse under the weight of their own betrayal. But now that it had begun, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about proving I was innocent. It was about reclaiming my identity. Reclaiming the person they tried to erase. The person who had once been their son, their brother. The person they buried beneath years of silence and shame. And once you dig someone out of a grave like that, they don't return the same. Sleep evaded me that night. I tossed and turned, memories washing over me like waves during a storm. I could still see my mother's face when she first saw me, the shock mixed with something darker. Fear. Guilt. Maybe both. I thought back to those early days after my father's death, when confusion turned to accusation, when grief twisted into something ugly and permanent. I reached for my phone, scrolling through photos I'd collected over the years, evidence of the life I'd built from ruins. A modest apartment in a city far from here. A degree earned at night while working 2 jobs. Friends who knew nothing of my past because I couldn't bear to speak it aloud. I'd become someone else, someone stronger, someone who didn't need their approval anymore. Yet here I was, back in the town that broke me, chasing ghosts and answers I wasn't sure would heal anything. Morning came with a harsh clarity. I knew what I had to do next. I dressed carefully in clothes that proved I hadn't just survived, I'd thrived. Success would be my first revenge. The sun was barely cresting the horizon when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. Please." It had to be my sister. No one else would have my number. I didn't respond, not yet. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Let her feel a fraction of what I felt all those years ago. 11 years earlier, the moment my father died, the foundation of our family cracked like brittle glass. In the weeks that followed, a storm of accusations rained down, most of them directed at me. There were whispers about mismanaged money, stolen assets, shady transfers. My mother was the first to raise suspicion. My sister followed, backing up her every word. I tried to defend myself. I showed them the documents I had, but they twisted them into something sinister. And when I started pushing for answers, that's when the door slammed shut. Literally. My mother packed my bags while I was out trying to get legal advice. She left them on the porch with a note that read, "It's better this way." My sister never spoke to me again after that. I didn't just lose a home. I lost my identity. I wandered for years, carrying the weight of their judgment like chains around my neck. The first 6 months were the hardest. I slept in my car most nights, too proud and too broken to reach out to the few friends who might have helped. I showered at truck stops and picked up odd jobs that paid cash. I changed my name, not legally, but in introductions. I became someone new because the old me was a criminal, a thief, a disappointment according to the only people whose opinion had ever mattered. I remember one night particularly well. It was winter, and the heater in my car had broken. I parked in a hospital parking garage, wrapped myself in all the clothes I owned, and tried to sleep. I woke up with tears frozen on my face. That was the night I made a promise to myself. I would never be that person again, cold, desperate, alone. I would rebuild, reclaim my life, and someday, I would find the truth. By the second year, I had found steady work and a room to rent. I started taking night classes, focused on business and finance, the very subjects that had been weaponized against me. I wanted to understand what had happened, to see through the numbers and statements that had allegedly proven my guilt. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Inconsistencies in the timeline, transactions that didn't make sense, signatures that seemed off. The third year, I started actively investigating. I created a system, meticulously tracking down old bank statements, property records, anything I could find without alerting my family. I discovered my father had been in deeper financial trouble than anyone knew. He had made desperate moves in his final months, moving money around to cover debts I hadn't known existed. Year 4 brought a breakthrough. I found a former employee of my father's company who remembered seeing my sister at the office late one night, just days before accusations against me began. He didn't know what she was doing there, but he remembered because it was unusual. She rarely visited. It wasn't much, but it was a thread to pull. But I never gave up on finding the truth. I knew deep down that someone had set me up. My instincts were right. It took years, but I slowly unraveled the threads. I found inconsistencies in my father's estate transactions, bank records linked to my sister's previous employer, transfers into shell accounts with names tied to her college friends, and the final nail, the journal entry she wrote one drunken night, tucked inside an old diary at the bottom of a box stored in my father's unused storage unit. I remember the day I found that storage unit. It was pure luck, or perhaps fate. I had been tracking down all properties connected to my father's name, and this one had slipped through the cracks because it was registered under a small business name he'd used briefly. The facility manager was suspicious when I first arrived, but the old key I still carried from my father's keyring worked, and that was enough for him. The unit was packed with forgotten fragments of our family life. Old furniture, holiday decorations, boxes of photographs my mother had claimed were lost in a move. And tucked behind everything, a stack of boxes labeled simply Sarah, my sister's name in my father's handwriting. I spent hours there, dust coating my clothes, spiders scurrying away from my intrusion. The diary was buried deep, a small leather-bound book with a broken lock. I almost didn't open it. Some part of me still respected her privacy, even after everything. But I needed answers more than I needed to preserve what little remained of our relationship. The entry was dated 3 weeks after my father's death. Her handwriting was erratic, the ink smudged in places where tears had fallen. She wrote about panic, about finding out our father had taken loans in her name, using her identity to secure money for his failing business. She wrote about the crushing debt she suddenly faced, about how she couldn't tell her fiancé, now her husband, because he would leave her. And then, the confession that changed everything. I did what I had to do. The accounts were already messy. No one was looking closely. It was so easy to move things around, make it look like Michael had done it. Mom was already suspicious of him, he was asking too many questions about Dad's business. She wanted to believe he was responsible. And Michael? He'll be okay. He always lands on his feet. He'll be angry, but he'll move on. This would have destroyed me. Reading those words, I felt something inside me break and reform. All these years, I had imagined complicated schemes, professional cover-ups. The truth was simpler and more devastating. My sister had sacrificed me to save herself, counting on family loyalty to keep me silent, counting on my tendency to retreat rather than fight. She knew me well enough to destroy me. That knowledge was its own kind of betrayal. In it, she confessed everything. The panic, the debt, the decision to move the money and point the finger at me because she knew I was the only one who wouldn't fight back. She counted on my silence. She counted wrong. When my mother and sister entered that storage unit and saw everything laid bare, it was like watching two people fall through a trapdoor they built themselves. I had arranged everything carefully, printed copies of bank records showing the transfers, statements from the accounts in my sister's friends' names, letters from creditors addressed to Sarah, and the diary, open to that damning page. I waited behind some stacked furniture, heart hammering in my chest, when they entered. I had sent an anonymous tip about valuable items in the unit, knowing curiosity would bring them here. My sister entered first, my mother a few steps behind. They moved cautiously, confused by the familiar items, shocked to find this piece of my father still existing in the world. Then my sister saw the display I'd arranged on an old desk. She froze, one hand flying to her mouth. My mother pushed past her, irritated by the sudden stop, then saw it too. I stood behind them, arms crossed, heart thudding like a war drum, and waited for the truth to burn its way into their skin. My sister broke first. She collapsed onto an old chair, clutching her head, tears streaming down her face. She kept saying, "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't think you'd disappear like that. I didn't think it would ruin you." My mother didn't say a word. She stood frozen, eyes bouncing between the documents like she was staring into a mirror for the first time in years. She knew. She had known at some point. But pretending had been easier. Safer. It's easier to exile one's son than to confront the daughter you raised to be perfect. The silence stretched between us, thick with 11 years of unspoken words. My sister looked up, finally seeing me standing there. She flinched like I'd raised a hand to her, though I remained perfectly still. "Michael," she whispered, my name sounding foreign on her lips after so long. "I'm so sorry. I was so scared. Dad left me with nothing but debt, and I panicked." "You left me with nothing but shame," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You took everything from me, my family, my home, my reputation. You let me believe I was crazy for knowing I was innocent." My mother turned to me then, her face ash gray. "We thought you'd come back," she said, as if that explained everything. "We thought you'd call, demand to be heard. But you just disappeared." After a while, it was easier to believe Sarah's story. Easier to think you had done something wrong and run away out of guilt. "Easier," I repeated. "Yes, I imagine it was easier for both of you. It wasn't easier for me." And then something strange happened. My mother sat down beside my sister, took her hand, and whispered, "We have to fix this." But it was too late. You don't fix a decade of abandonment with a whisper. You don't undo that kind of betrayal with a few tears. I didn't say a word. I just placed a sealed envelope on the table and turned to leave. Inside was a copy of the entire file I had compiled, neatly organized with timelines, names, evidence, and one final letter addressed to both of them. Not full of rage or blame, but truth. My truth. I told them what those years were like. The nights I slept in my car. The times I stood outside hospitals afraid to walk in because I had no insurance. The holidays spent alone. The birthdays that came and went without a single message. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't need it. I just needed them to know what it cost to be erased. As I walked away from the storage unit, I felt lighter somehow. The burden of proof had been mine for so long, the weight of suspicion and doubt crushing me beneath it. Now I had shifted that weight back where it belonged, onto their shoulders. Let them carry it for a while. Let them feel what it was like to have your foundation crumble beneath you. I checked out of the motel the next day and drove to the coast. I had always found peace near the water, something about the endless horizon and the rhythm of waves that put my chaotic thoughts in order. I rented a small cottage for a week, planning to decompress, to process everything that had happened and decide what to do next. The first few days were a blur. I slept more than I had in years, exhausted from carrying the truth for so long. I walked on the beach for hours, letting the salt air scour away the last traces of doubt and guilt. I felt free, in a way I hadn't since before my father died. The story was out. The lies were exposed. Whatever happened next, I had done what I set out to do. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from them. I assumed that was it. Truth delivered. Silence returned. But then, something unexpected happened. Letters began to arrive. From my sister. From my mother. Long, handwritten pages filled with memories, regrets, and a kind of sorrow that was too heavy to fake. My sister's first letter was tear-stained and rambling. She wrote about that terrible time after our father died, how she discovered he had taken out loans in her name, how she panicked when creditors started calling. She admitted to moving money around, to deliberately creating a paper trail that would point to me. I was selfish and desperate, she wrote. I told myself you would be okay, that you were stronger than me, that you would bounce back. I never imagined you would just go. And once you were gone, the lie was too big to take back. Mom had already told everyone. The family had already chosen sides. And I was a coward. My mother's letters were different. She spoke of fear, of how losing Dad had broken her more than she could admit, of how easy it had been to believe the worst about me because she had already lost one part of the family and couldn't face losing another. I think I knew, deep down, she confessed in one letter. There were too many holes in Sarah's story. But I couldn't bear to lose her too. So I chose her over you, and I've lived with that choice every day since. My sister admitted she had been spiraling for years, that the guilt had eaten away at her quietly, that her marriage had cracks she couldn't repair because deep down, she knew it was built on lies. He knows something isn't right, she wrote. He's always known. That's why he asked who you were at the party. He's seen your picture before, in old albums I couldn't bear to throw away. Part of him recognized you. With each letter, a piece of the past shifted into clearer focus. The lies, once exposed, seemed to multiply. My sister confessed to destroying evidence that would have cleared me, to hiding calls I had made to the house after I left. My mother admitted to telling family and friends that I had stolen from them all, that I was troubled, unstable, better kept at a distance. They had created a narrative where I was the villain, and they had lived in that story for so long that the truth felt like an invasion. The words were honest, but they didn't undo the years. I visited the old house one last time, not to forgive them. I had already done that for my own sake. I visited to let them see me, the real me, standing tall, rebuilt. Not the ghost that walked into that birthday party, but the man who walked away from it with his dignity intact. They were waiting for me on the porch when I arrived. My mother looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her choices. My sister had none of the glow she'd had at her party, her edges seemed softer, less defined, like someone who had been crying for days. Her husband wasn't there. I learned later that she had finally told him everything, and he had moved out, needing time to process how much of his life had been built on carefully crafted lies. We sat on the porch, the three of us, just like we used to on summer nights before everything fell apart. We didn't say much. There wasn't much left to say. But in the silence, there was something new, understanding. They knew they couldn't take it all back, but they wanted to try to know me again. And I was willing to let them try. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said finally, breaking a silence that had stretched for minutes. But I'm tired of carrying this. Tired of letting what happened define who I am. My mother nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. We don't deserve another chance, she said. But if you're willing to give one, we'll spend the rest of our lives earning it. My sister looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. I've been paying for what I did every day, she said quietly. Not enough, I know. But I haven't known peace since you left. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I understand now what I took from you. And I'm so sorry. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. How could it be? Too much damage had been done, too many years lost. But it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain as new growth after a forest fire. Closure doesn't always come with fireworks or apologies shouted into the sky. Sometimes, it comes in quiet moments. In letters written with shaking hands. In photos returned to frames. In a porch swing creaking softly as broken people try to heal together. I left that town a few days later, not with vengeance in my heart, but with peace. The truth had been spoken. The lies had died, and I finally was free. Not free from the past, none of us ever truly escaped that, but free from its power to control my future. Free to choose what role these people would play in my life going forward, not as the family that abandoned me, but as flawed, broken humans who had made terrible mistakes and were living with the consequences. As I drove away, watching the town shrink in my rearview mirror, I thought about identity, how easily it can be stripped away, how painstakingly it must be rebuilt. I had walked into my sister's birthday party as a ghost seeking vengeance. I was leaving as a man who had reclaimed his name, his story, his truth. The journey ahead would be complicated. Trust, once shattered, doesn't mend easily. But for the first time in 11 years, the road ahead seemed full of possibility rather than shadows. 6 months later, I stood in front of my apartment door, keys in hand, hesitating. Inside waiting for me was my mother. We had talked weekly since I left town, awkward conversations at first, gradually becoming more natural. Today was the first time she had come to visit my world, to see the life I'd built without them. I finally unlocked the door to find her sitting nervously on my couch, looking out of place among my things. She stood when she saw me, uncertain whether to hug me or keep her distance. I made the choice for her, stepping forward and embracing her briefly. She smelled like home, like the perfume she'd worn my entire life, and for a moment, I was a child again, safe in her arms before everything fell apart. "Your place is lovely," she said, glancing around at the modest but comfortable apartment. "It's home," I replied simply. We spent the day walking through my neighborhood. I showed her the coffee shop where I rode every morning, the park where I ran, the bookstore where I'd found myself again through stories that weren't my own. I introduced her to a few friends who knew nothing of our history but greeted her warmly because she was my mother. I watched her absorb these fragments of my life, seeing me clearly perhaps for the first time in over a decade. That night, over dinner, she slid an envelope across the table. "I've been setting this aside," she said quietly. "It doesn't make up for anything, but..." Inside was a check, my share of my father's estate, with interest. The money I'd been accused of stealing, returned at last. I almost laughed at the irony. Years ago, this would have changed everything. Now, it was just paper. "I don't need it," I said, pushing it back toward her. "I know," she replied, tears in her eyes. "That's why I want you to have it. You built all this without us, without what was rightfully yours. I'm so proud of you, Michael. I know I don't have the right to be, but I am." I kept in touch with my sister too, though our healing was slower, more complicated. Her marriage had ended, the foundation too damaged by lies to repair. She was starting over, much as I had once done. There was a symmetry to it that wasn't lost on me. The weight I had carried for so long, the need to prove my innocence, to force them to face what they had done, had finally been set down. And in its place was something I hadn't expected to find. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of peace that comes from standing in your truth and being seen, finally, for who you really are. Last week, I received a package. Inside was a photo album I'd never seen before. My sister had compiled it, pictures of me she'd kept hidden away during those lost years. Birthday celebrations from my childhood. Graduation. Family vacations. Proof that I had existed in their world, even when they pretended otherwise. On the last page was a new photo, the three of us on that porch the day we began to rebuild. We looked uncertain, damaged, but somehow hopeful. Beneath it, she had written simply, "The truth was always there. I'm sorry it took us so long to see it." I don't know what the future holds for us. Some days the past feels too heavy, the betrayal too deep. But other days, I glimpse what might be possible, not the family we were, but something new, built on honesty this time. I've learned that closure isn't an endpoint but a process, ongoing and imperfect. And that sometimes the longest journeys lead you not away from home, but to a truer version of it than you ever knew existed.